Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday, the 11th of April, and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. So, how are you, Phil?
Happy Easter.
Yeah, happy Easter.
Are you going anywhere?
Easter. It's a rather strange Easter. It doesn't feel like Easter, does it?
No, I think I should have been in Spain, as of this morning. I think from what my diary said previously, should have been sat on a beach in Nerca, probably drinking a beer and eating a bit of tapas. But obviously we're not. So, but we are staying indoors and staying safe, aren't
we? We are indeed, and you can probably still have a cold beer at
some
stage.
Yeah. Look outside the window at the sun, the lovely weather we're having. But no, it's going to be an interesting one, this, isn't it, with the 4-day Easter weekend and people not being able to do what they would normally do. But let's hope that people do stay indoors and stay safe, and we get ourselves through these restrictions. We hope sooner than the better, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, and of course, if people are staying in and staying safe, it's a good opportunity to listen to podcasts.
Got a few, haven't we? Got a few good ones.
Yeah. So if you are one of the many new listeners tuning in for the first time, then welcome aboard. This is episode 282. So we're fast approaching the 300 mark, and welcome aboard. Where have you been?
I mean, that doesn't include the specials, does it, as well? The ones that we've been pushing out midweek.
It might do.
Does it? Have you ordered it up long?
Yeah, no, that includes the specials.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah.
I apologise on that one then. That's fine. So there's been a lot going on, haven't we? I mean, we've earlier this week we had a fantastic interview that was well received, and that was an interview with Darren Edwards, the CEO of Sitners. And that is part of the ongoing COVID-19 series, isn't it, Curtis, that we've been doing?
Yeah, and it follows on from only last week, Mike Jones from ASC and Umesh Samani from the IMDA. And before that, of course, Robert Forrester from Virtue Motors.
So there's a lot going on in there. I mean, some fantastic interviews there from, as you say, from the guys across the sector, and they're quite open and honest in what they're doing as a business, aren't they, and sharing some of their thoughts on what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, Darren, the interview we did with Darren Edwards, which we'll actually include at the end of this podcast. So, do stay tuned if you haven't heard it before. But there's quite a good human angle to it, because you may not be aware, but Darren actually had a bike accident in January. So he's actually been laid up and working from home since mid-January. And he was telling us that he'd only just got back to work. He was just getting back to visiting some dealerships because he'd been working from home because he had a fractured hip, didn't he?
Right, yeah.
So he just got mobile, just got out and about, and of course then the lockdown happened. So the interview sort of tracks what happened as soon as the lockdown was announced, and how Sitner swung into action to close the businesses, and in fact open 30 strategically placed key worker support centres. So really good interview there. There's lots of interesting insights as to how decisions were made on the hoof really quickly.
Yeah, I think he said he got out to visit 2 dealerships. And I think that was by chauffeur as well, wasn't it? So, and then it was straight into lockdown again. So I think he's really desperate to get through this and get back behind the wheel of a car, I think. Obviously not on his bike for some time, I suspect, but definitely behind the wheel of a car and get himself back on the road and visiting some of his sites when we get through the end of this. But fantastic interview. So we've got quite a few headlines, and it's even though there's the sector is in lockdown, there's still a lot of activity taking place, obviously around key workers and essential workers, but we've got quite a lot of headlines, and we've had to be quite selective on some of these because there has been a lot going on this week.
There has, yeah. No, I'm kind of reminded of that saying of Harold Wilson's that a week is a long time in politics. Well, a week seems to be an awful long time in car retailing at the moment because everything is moving so quickly. So, headlines this week: what car dealers need to think about over Easter. So, there's a really good action plan here from ASC. The IMDA celebrates the inclusion of commission pay in the government's job retention scheme. Ford's offering a 6-month payment holiday to new car buyers, an update on used car dealers and how they must resist the temptation to reduce prices. We'll take a look at some of the initiatives around the country with Belfast MOT Centre opening for COVID-19 testing, and a look at what some of the big dealer groups are doing, and indeed one of the car supermarkets in terms of salaries of key execs.
Yeah, and then obviously we've got the interview with Darren Edwards there at the end. So we'll move on to the first one, and it kind of follows on nicely in terms of what we were saying earlier about having Mike Jones on from ASE, and they have produced a report stroke document that's available for download. But this is the release is on Car Dealer, and it's what car dealers need to think about over Easter and put into action on Tuesday. So they're sort of giving a bit of sort of best practice, haven't they, of things that dealers should be considering through this restriction period, just to make sure that the business continues to engage with customers, and things that they need to think about in terms of that cash flow, which was obviously a bit of the bit that Mike was sharing on the interview, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a 5-point guide, and it's really aimed at dealers to look at over the course of the weekend. So it is available on a link on that particular story on the Car Dealer website. But there's some interesting comments from Mike in this particular story, because he says, we must accept that there is no guarantee how long this will last. Therefore, you must do everything you can to survive and be in a strong position when we come out of this situation. And he goes on to say the key will be ensuring you are not carrying a heavier debt burden when we do emerge. And that's one of the things that came over really clearly in the interview we did with him last week.
It is, isn't it? And I mean, it's a case of, it's difficult because, we talked about it, didn't we, around the government grants and supports, and some of the initiatives from the government are kind of publicised before they've got the systems up and running and the finer detail defined for what they're going to do. But he's talking about ensure that everything is in place to apply for the government furlough support. So making sure that you're on the system, you're getting input of the information ready for when the button is pressed from the government to start that sort of payment for the furlough grant. And obviously talking about that cash flow forecast is up to date, because as you said, it's key is that cash flow into it as we go through this restriction period.
Yeah, it is, and this is all about having return strategies in place and start thinking about that now.
Yeah, and a final point they've got on there really is it seems simple in a way, but actually it's really important, and that is about making sure that you are keeping in contact with your customers and responding to any customer inquiries that come in. And I think talking to a number of dealers over recent weeks, I mean that is an initiative that a lot of them have done, is making sure that it is over communication either with their own colleagues and staff and the customers. Some people say that are we just talking to them too much, and I don't think there is that at the minute. You can't talk to somebody too much at the minute. Communication and regular contact seems to be key, doesn't it, for this?
It does, yeah. So next story is from AM, and the headline is IMDA celebrates inclusion of commission pay in government job retention scheme. So, hats off to the IMDA here, because they did a lot of lobbying to get government to think about this. And this is actually something that's covered in our interview with Darren Edwards, because he praises the IMDA as well as the NFDA and indeed some trade bodies representing estate agents, because commission is absolutely crucial to these workforces.
No, definitely. And they say, a lot of, they said that 27,000 people actually signed the IMDA petition that set up, and that was submitted to the government, and obviously NFDA did their letter they'd written to Kemi Bonuchet. How do you pronounce that, Curtis?
No, yeah, I'll leave that with you.
Thank
Phil.
you. You always do, yeah. Thank you. And obviously, that was about seeking full clarification around this job retention scheme, and obviously commission structures and average pay. And it wasn't just sales commission, was it? This was about overtime and shift work and things like this. There was it was a wider question just to the outside of the automotive sector, but they have responded, and it's been successful. So, as they say, Darren Edwards did praise both the IMDA and the NFDA for the efforts they have with that, and I think generally, I think the associations for the industry have been very good at supporting the network in regular updates, regular communications, and obviously lobbying to the government and making sure that they are fighting for support for the automotive sector. So hats off to those guys for all the work they are doing.
Yep. And next story is from What Car, with the headline Ford offers 6-month payment holidays to new car buyers. So this is a new peace of mind program introduced by Ford and indeed Ford Credit. So it applies to orders of new cars and vans throughout April and May online, with payments deferred for 6 months and deliveries by the end of the year. So it's a mixture of there's a cashback element to this to help cover 3 monthly payments, or a reduction of the same value on the amount borrowed. So this is Ford moving to just generate a bit of interest out there, and to reassure customers that they can buy, and there is this deferred payment now in place.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on there. I think it is about this reassurance, isn't it? That with the previous story, we don't know when, the ASE where we don't know when we're going to exit this. We don't know when restrictions are going to start to lift, and when they do start to lift, it's certainly going to be a new environment that the sector finds itself in terms of this distancing and everything else. So, I think for Ford to come across and say, that it is about this reassurance, because there's a lot of customers out there that want their cars. There's a lot of cars sat on dealership forecourts, both new and used, that haven't been collected, that a customer's bought, and the restrictions are stopping the final stage of that process. But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of support coming from the OEMs and the dealers with this, because they're all in that same boat. And I think there was an announcement that's due to come out from the government about this sort of deferment of loans and support around overdrafts and things like this. And it to me, it's all about that, maintaining that consumer confidence, that when we do come out at the end of this, that personal debt isn't too heavy, and there is still some, we can recover that consumer confidence index as soon as possible. Because it's a shame, really, because following the Brexit, we've talked about it previously, we're following that Brexit period, we all that sort of -14, -15 consumer confidence index, and then we started to reduce that as we came out of Brexit in December. And then, I think it's now a case of the government sort of re-stimulating that as quickly as possible when we come out of the back end of this. So it's great initiatives coming out from all parties at the minute.
Yeah, and it really is a compelling offer from Ford, because it applies to PCPs and PCHs, and bearing in mind that a lot of the Ford range is available with 0% APR. So customers out there thinking of a new car, this would make the decision an awful lot easier. So it'd be interesting to see what other OEMs do over the coming weeks.
Definitely. And going back to AM Online, and this is a story that's quite, I mean, it's very subjective, isn't it? Very personal to a lot of people. But talk about the used car dealers must resist temptation to reduce prices, and that's coming out of Auto Trader. And we were talking about this before the recording work with it's very difficult, that balance between maintaining value, maintaining margin, not impacting on a sort of a liquidation depreciation when we come out at the back end of this. But there are businesses that require cash and need to get that cash flow moving, but at the same time it doesn't want to be at the detriment of reducing the market price of vehicles and potential margins in the market.
Yeah, it is a real conundrum, isn't it? And you can argue both sides of this. But interestingly, within the story, Auto Trader's retail price index, which analysed figures from March, showed that values were down just 0.2% over the course of March. So that kind of tallies with the story we reported on. I think it was only last week that Cap HPI freezing their values. So a fall of 0.2%. That's pretty good going, actually.
It is, and I suppose it begs the question that actually, if people are going to buy, they'll buy, won't they? They're in the market for buying a vehicle, and if they feel that they've got the financial, in a financial position to do that, they'll buy. Is price reduction going to stimulate a customer that isn't going to buy into buying? Is the big question. Is how much of a price point do you take a customer that's not in the market into the market? And I don't know. It's a challenge, but I think you're right. I think the more we get through this, and looking at those price indicators, and I think Cap HPI took that pragmatic view as we spoke about previously. I think Auto Trader are putting out continual webinars on a weekly basis and sharing some of their insight and what they're tracking. I think Motors have shared something as well into the market around that sort of price indicators. So I think there's a lot of people watching it very closely, but I think the quicker we can get through this and price stabilizes, the quicker we can get back to some kind of normality of trading.
So you're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group, the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector, and available online at motortraderadio.com and by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer and SoundCloud.
So we're heading over to Ireland now with the BBC, and you mentioned it at the start there, and I think we've talked about this, haven't we? Because we'd mentioned it previously. Somebody came up with the idea that why don't they use MOT centres because of their sort of strategic placing and accessibility to turn into COVID-19 testing. And this is reported, say, on BBC News, and Belfast MOT Centre opens for COVID-19 testing, and it's a great idea, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And this particular centre, the Balmoral MOT Centre, is just off the Boucher Road. So that is pretty much the sort of motor mile in Belfast, and it's such a good initiative because, as you say, MOT centres, they're sort of strategically located, they're easily accessible, and they've got the IT connections as well to make this viable. So this is the first one, and it actually joins the SSE arena in Belfast, which also has a drive-through coronavirus testing service for key workers, NHS workers. So it'd be great to see this rolled out across the country, especially for MOT centres that aren't open at the moment, because there is no MOT testing. So if they've elected to close, it's a good way to just reopen and repurpose for this.
Yeah, and there's a nice quote in the story from the infrastructure minister Nicola Mallon, and she says that through use of our MOT centres, we're delighted to be able to support the health minister and play our part in helping to rapidly increase testing to save lives. And I think that's the key with this. If there's locations available, they're not being utilised for the normal use, then why not? Do this and get this sort of quickly through this testing to help the NHS staff through this as well. So fantastic work, that, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, the next two stories are linked. The first one's from Motor Trader, and the headline is Pendragon to donate 20% of CEO salary to NHS amid voluntary cuts. So this is Pendragon will be donating the 20% of CEO Bill Berman's salary to the NHS, and it's actually at his request. And this is part of a voluntary scheme across the company, implementing a 20% reduction in salary for corporate staff. So board members and members of the senior leadership team, their salaries are being reduced by up to 20%. Upper management salary reductions of up to 15%, and other corporate and field personnel salary reductions of up to 20%. And it's worth pointing out that Pendragon have 80% of staff now on furlough.
What a time for Bill to join the business. I mean,
yes.
It doesn't seem 2 minutes ago where we were talking about obviously all the challenges within Pendragon, and that they were struggling to find a CEO and somebody at the helm to lead it going forward, and obviously then we were celebrating the Bill taking the helm there and having the sort of the history of his work in the US and where they could take that business in the UK, and then this happens, and I don't know, it must be an absolute challenge for him. He's straight into a new business to take it through, and then obviously he's faced with this at the same time. But fantastic, like you say, initiative from Bill there in what they've done from himself and the board to help support this going forward.
Yeah, and the next story, as I say, these two stories are linked, is from AM Online, and the headline is Motorpoint CEO gives up wage to top up income of furloughed staff. Now, this is an initiative from Mark Carpenter, who's CEO of Motorpoint. So he's vowed to give up his own income from the used car supermarket business in order to top up the wages of furloughed staff during the COVID-19 lockdown. So what a great story here.
Yeah.
And it's not just PR for Motorpoint. This is really supporting his staff. So it's a great move here from Mark Carpenter.
It is. I mean, these groups and other businesses, it is about that stack, because you've got people on furlough. It's not their fault. They want to work. And it's to get the business through this challenging time. And at the end, you can imagine that when we come out the back end of this, there's a lot of work to do. That it isn't going to be just back to normal day-to-day working process. There's going to be a lot of things. There'll be people in jobs that they're not used to doing. There'll be a change of roles and responsibilities and things like this. So, you've got to get your workforce, your colleagues through this, keep them really motivated and look after them, because the businesses are going to need these as more than ever, aren't they, when we come back to some kind of normality at the other end of this.
Yeah, and it's worth adding that, similar to Pendragon, Motorpoint's executive team and operational directors have also agreed to take voluntary pay cuts to support the wider workforce.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And the last story is slightly different, isn't it? And this is that on Automotive News Europe, and this is about Inchcape, and the dealer group have scrapped dividends and cuts pay to help get through this. So it's kind of along them same lines, but fairly comfortable, aren't they, in terms of the liquidity, with having a 600 million liquidity at the minute. So they do see themselves obviously being able to survive this.
Yeah, and I guess the link with the last two stories is that the board and senior management team have agreed to take a 20% pay cut, in a move to cut costs during the coronavirus lockdown.
Yeah, no, it's again, I mean, obviously this is from a company that operates in more than 32 international markets, and slightly bigger scale, isn't it? But again, great that they are helping out through this.
Yeah, and interestingly, within the story, it does suggest that Inchcape is considering accessing the government's coronavirus corporate financing facility to boost liquidity. So this was all revealed in the statements earlier in the week.
Yeah. So we've got a bit of a quick roundup because there's been a lot going on, and there's some fantastic news stories and within the social media this week, and some of the stuff that hasn't necessarily hit the headlines but has been shared through the social channels. So we've just picked a couple out, haven't we, this week, Curtis?
We have, yeah. These were all on LinkedIn, and I do urge any listeners to do send us any links they have. We're both on LinkedIn, you know where to find us. But the first one is from Sitner. So this is after a call from one of their apprentice technicians to say that her mother and other frontline NHS nurses were severely short of PPE supplies. The team at the Volkswagen Commercial Vehicle Centre in Llandudno mobilised, and the next day they were able to supply boxes of gloves and masks to ensure their local NHS heroes could continue their work. So that was a really good story, and a good picture as well. Which if you do see it, do like and share it.
Definitely. And then we've got one from Wessex Garage, and they've donated on a similar line, haven't they? They've donated 14,000 gloves, 7 rolls of seat covers to the NHS to help them stay safe in the front fight against the COVID-19, and there's a picture of Mike Spencer collecting on behalf of the NHS from their dealership down in Newport, and obviously all thanking the NHS staff and the key workers for all the incredible work they've been doing throughout this period.
Yeah, and the final one comes from Peter Vardy, and he says, we decided to set up our own after-sales SAS team to keep key workers mobile in this difficult time, and I've been really impressed with the team and the help they have provided to people so far. So to help even further, the team suggested setting up a mobile servicing unit for people who couldn't make it to us. And this was their first call carrying out work for a doctor at their surgery to keep them mobile and on the road. So Peter goes on to say, can't tell you how proud this makes me of the people I have in this company. Take care of yourself, keep safe, and keep in contact with me if you wish. It's really great to keep talking. And that kind of reiterates what we were saying earlier about, it's important to talk to customers at this time, but it's also very important to talk to your staff.
Yeah, and I think on the Darren interview and the others, I think that he was talking about they're having calls between CEO and CEO of these large groups on a regular basis, and they talk about the WhatsApp group that the dealers took over, and there's a lot of collaboration taking place at the minute. So these guys are at the lead of some of these businesses. I mean, they're there to talk to people. They're there to have a chat, talk about how they can help each other out through this, and they are engaging with their fellow leadership, management teams, the board, and more importantly, every colleague across the business. There's some fantastic work going on in this, keeping up with communications. So keep your eye out on these on LinkedIn and the social channels, because there's a lot of great work being done across the sector.
Yeah, so that's all the headlines this week. So many thanks for tuning in and listening. This has been the Motor Trade Radio News Roundup in association with eBay Motors Group. We are the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector. And yeah, we do thank you for tuning in. Do join Phil and I again next weekend, and do look out for any special interviews during the week. We've got a couple in the pipeline, so hopefully we'll be able to stream those from Tuesday onwards. Until then, stay tuned in for a special interview we recorded earlier in the week with Sytner CEO Darren Edwards.
Hello and welcome from me, Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchison, to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us on the latest in our series of special interviews with industry leaders during the COVID-19 crisis. Our recent conversations with Virtue Motors CEO Robert Forrester, IMDA's Chairman Umesh Samani, and ASE Chairman Mike Jones are also available to stream online from motortraderadio.com, Spotify and Apple and Google podcasts.
So our special guest today is Darren Edwards, CEO of Sytner, the largest dealer group in the UK. Welcome to the podcast, Darren.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining us. Now, while home working will be a new experience for many dealer group bosses and indeed many listeners today, you've actually had a bit of a head start following a cycling injury early in the year. So first of all, how are you? And what is a typical day for you following the lockdown?
Yeah, well, yes. Well, I came off my bike in January and fractured my hip. So I've been working from home pretty much since then, really. And so I'm quite used to it by now. I start by sort of checking social feeds, looking at the news as the sun's coming up, and then I get up just as I used to when I was still, going into the office. I try and sort of wear, business type clothes, sort of smart casual clothing, so I feel in a work mode. And then the rest of the day really is spent on Zoom, either in team meetings or with individual directors, looking at the data that's coming in, and trying to sort of steer a course depending on what we're seeing, which is varies day by day at the moment. Lots of communication with the team, it's really important, and also keeping close to our furloughed and self-isolating colleagues. So it's been a bit of a different working pattern, but very much the same. But rather than being physically engaging with everyone, it's now being sort of video and virtual, really.
The new norm for the minute, isn't it? So
new norm.
Yeah. Welcome and glad you're at least back on your feet. And
yes,
you can
off
do
crutches last
off
week
crutches.
Now, so it's been 3 long months.
So in terms of Sytner's, and could you take us through some of the sort of the planning in sort of Sytner's response to the initial lockdown and obviously what's happening in the aftermath, particularly thinking about that workshop and after sales market?
Sure. Well, I think the announcement to close schools was made around about the 17th of March, and then from the next morning, really, our sales dropped by about 50%. And I think from speaking to other dealer group, leaders and managers, I think that was a similar picture. And then on the Friday, I think the 20th, when they announced that bars and restaurants were told to close, we kind of guessed that shops and retailers would be next. And that was certainly the experience based on our Italian dealerships, who are about 2 weeks ahead of us. So we announced on the Monday, to lunchtime, that to all our colleagues and also to our customers that we're going to close the showrooms on the Tuesday night. So we started to work towards that. But then watching the news that night, I sort of spat out my glass of wine as the government said that, all retailers were to be shut that night. So, we had to quickly adapt our plans, and then we worked through the night. So by about midnight, we'd written to just under 1 million customers and about 10,000 colleagues, telling them, not to visit the showrooms the following day, and then went to bed quite tired. But then, when I woke up the next day, we were told that, the guidance had changed and that garages could stay open. So, we'd sent a text to everybody the night before saying, don't come in. So we had to quickly change our view on that. But that was fine because we'd always planned to have just a few workshops open. We've got 30 workshops open now supporting key workers strategically placed around the country. So So that kind of went okay. Some colleagues were, pretty confused in the morning. They were a little scared because, 1 minute I'm telling them not to come in and the next minute we're saying you can come in. But now they've settled into a good groove, looking after key workers. And the team, I think they feel pretty proud of the work they're doing, seeing lots of stuff posted in our internal Yammer feeds and social media. So it was, it was quite frantic, but now I think we're in a pretty good place.
Now, Darren, with workshops, I mean, you've just said that you've got 30 key workshops open, looking after NHS staff, key workers, emergency services. Can you take us through the importance of maintaining online new and used car activities during the lockdown?
Yes, I mean, we've been in a bit of a dilemma because I think firstly, we feel it's vitally important as a company to adhere to the government's stay home instructions. So, we're not allowing any deliveries to take place at the moment. The first day or so, there was a bit like, the embassy shutting down and everyone trying to jump on the helicopter. It was a few people trying to get their cars out. So that happened. But now we are, we're fully locked down. But as a business, we thrive on innovation. So we've now launched our buy online process on our website. We've introduced a home-based telesales team by division to deal with any inquiries. And we probably launched that slightly earlier than we'd planned. We had planned to launch that in the summer, so we brought that forward. So it's had a few glitches. I think at one point we offered a Bentley for sale for nothing, free of charge. So that was quite fun. But the IT and marketing teams have worked through the night over the last few days, and they've ironed that out. And it's actually now pretty slick. But what we haven't done yet is pushed it any hard in terms of marketing. We just don't feel the time is right to do that. It would send the wrong message. But we are having plenty of what I would call natural visits, and we've now sold over 140 cars this month, which 1 week in, it's about 10% of what we'd normally do. But it's a start, and I think once we can start confirming delivery dates, then I expect that to become a bigger share of what we're doing. So I think it's really important that we sort of learn from this, and I think the longer the lockdown lasts, the more we will learn, and then we can adapt to whatever consumer demand looks like, once we're on the other side of all this, really. So I think it's been really important to sort of put the toe in the water and see how it works.
And this is a mixture of new and used cars, is it?
Mainly used. We are taking new inquiries through the website and into the telesales teams, all based at home, all using Zoom, all connected. But the online sales is purely for used at the moment, and that's on the Sytner website rather than the manufacturer's website, because we do online sales with JLR and with BMW as well. So for us, it's mainly been the looking at used cars.
Yes,
and it's going to be interesting in terms of this is the third week now that and there's a feeling that we were talking before the show that it's becoming a bit of a norm. It isn't a norm because we're not in a normal environment at the minute, but the initial lockdown, then there was trying to get the head around the furloughing and things like that, and then there seems to be a bit of a settling now as we head towards the sort of bank holiday weekend in terms of that consumer market, and you just wonder whether activity online will start to stabilise, if not start to increase, as people sort of start to sit down and get on the computers and start to do a bit of research and look for things possibly.
Yeah, it's good. We're 10% of sales at the moment with 130 showrooms completely closed and just people working from home. So as we start to get more inquiries, we can unfurlough team members, we can put them working. They don't have to come into work. They just start working on their phone and engaging with people on the internet and by email and live chat, etc. So that 10% could become 20, could become 30 quite quickly, I think.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see how it develops.
And in terms of the franchise sector, what would you say is the mood of the sector at the minute? And I presume, are you talking to other sort of sector leaders and group heads across the market? What are you hearing from the OEMs as well? Because it's there's a lot going on and everybody's in it together at the minute, aren't they? It's a slightly different market.
Yeah, I think the collaboration actually has been fantastic. I've been talking to my colleagues that do the same kind of job as me at the other dealer groups, probably at least twice a week, sometimes daily, sometimes more than once a day. And at first we were all trying to work out what was appropriate with regards to sort of car deliveries and workshop openings, and taking guidance from the government and OEMs, and trying to find the balance. And I think we've probably done that now. Everyone's decided what they're going to do in terms of their approach. And then it was, as you mentioned, trying to understand the details of the job retention scheme, and and then there was a bit of lobbying about the trying to get commissions incorporated in terms of the calculation, and that was great. And I must say, I think the NFDA played a big part in making that happen, and also the IMDA as well, and all the estate agent trade bodies. They all helped. So I think lots and lots of communication between the franchise networks, and then from the manufacturers. Some I think now trying to work out what is appropriate in terms of timing new car deliveries. But I think in the first few days, it worked really, really hard to introduce all these kind of extraordinary measures we've seen to ensure that their networks stay liquid, advancing bonus funds and extending floor plan and, making it free of charge, and just really trying to do everything they could to try and keep us liquid. And I think I've been really, personally been really pleased by their approach. And I think that's why, for me, the franchise model, I know we've got a used car business, but the franchise model is still very attractive, because when the chips are down, they do have your back, and I really can't fault any of them for their support levels so far. So yeah, it's very fast moving, and lots of decisions need to be made. But I was really pleased with how the network and the dealer groups generally collaborated. It's been great to see actually the camaraderie between all of us.
In fact, Darren, a couple of weeks ago, Robert Forrester was on the podcast, and he told us about a WhatsApp group that had been started up by one of the OEMs and had been jumped on by all the dealer group bosses who are using it as a way to keep in touch with each other. I mean, is that something you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I was part of that group as well, and made my comments on there. And clearly, you've got to be a bit careful, competition law and everything. But ultimately, we were in a unique situation,
yes,
and all just trying to find out the best way to move forward, really. And so I think it was, that kind of collaboration, and as I say, the camaraderie has been excellent, and the level of expertise and knowledge that we all have that we can share just means that we've been able to adapt to this situation quicker than if you just felt isolated. So I think it's been great, actually, really, really good.
Yeah. Now, Sytner is pretty much unique in the franchise sector, as you own and operate a large network of car supermarkets. So can you tell us how the car shop lockdown has gone? And are you seeing a rise in online visits since the lockdown to car shop?
Yeah, I think, it's been quite interesting. I mean, firstly, on the lockdown side of things, we managed it as a team of 3 entities, really, because we had, the Sytner Group based on obviously Great Britain, and then we have Northern Ireland with Agnews, and then we have the car shop business. So, using Zoom, we were able to communicate across all 3 companies. So the process for locking down was identical for each company. So it went very, very smooth. Business levels obviously impacted similar to the franchise business, really, down by about 90%. But again, we've got a telesales team in place. They're not quite online yet. They're probably earlier than we were in terms of their process, in terms of reservations online and finance acceptance. But you can't actually do the full transaction yet, whereas you can on the Sytner website. But they are, at the moment, building an order bank, ready for when we can start deliveries again. Their after sales business is actually very small, unlike our franchise business, where half the GP we produce is through after sales. For theirs, it's a small percentage. So none of the workshops are open, but they are taking future bookings. So again, it's just about building that order bank ready for when we can open the doors.
So in terms of the used car market and recently Cap HPI, because there's always this question around what will happen. We're not in a 2008 2009 where there is supply but no demand, and everything's shut down. So we're in a unique place at the minute, which is, as you've just been saying there about the collaboration and everything that's going on, which we are in a new unique market. But in terms of, were you encouraged initially by Cap HPI's, probably people are saying, a pragmatic view to freeze use valuations as sort of volumes of data started to slow down and initially stop entirely? And what do you think the implications are for the group? Because obviously we've got a recovery side of this as well, haven't we? We've got the lockdown, and then obviously when we start to come out of it, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think the freeze was very welcome. It made no sense to me to move prices down when there just aren't any transactions being made. I think it would be both unfair to dealers and also to customers. I think because we're in this limbo at the moment. I mean, for us, we've got over 20,000 used cars in stock right now, over 400 million pounds invested. Just a 1% drop on that when you're not actually selling anything is quite a big chunk of profit to take, if that's what would have been the case, for instance. So no, I think it was definitely the right thing to do. I think everybody feels that it was the correct thing to do. Obviously, once we come out of lockdown, we'll have to see what level of the demand is and react accordingly. And that will generate the transactions that you can then measure the pricing on, and obviously then the cap HPI will set the values accordingly. But I think for now, holding them steady was definitely the right thing to do, and it just gives everyone a bit of breathing space to manage the rest of the business without worrying about stock devaluing. So it was very welcome.
Now, Sytner is part of a global group that operates across North America and continental Europe as well as the UK. So are there any experiences and best practices that the UK has been able to share as being part of the Penske group?
Yes, I mean, it's, well, as you can imagine, Roger, Penske at the moment, I mean, we've been talking daily about what's happening across the globe, particularly in the US, where they have the kind of largest part of their business. But it's the European businesses that we have, particularly Northern Ireland, that encountered the virus first, really, because as we know, that was the first hotspot in Europe. And we've got a business out there called the Autovanti dealer group, and it's kind of like a mini Sytner with the same brand. It's got about 20 dealerships based in kind of Bologna, Milan. So right in the hotspot, really. So they started to put all the social distancing measures in place 2 or 3 weeks before we had to. And then they went into lockdown a couple of weeks before we did. So it's been really helpful to talk to the team there and understand the actions that they had taken in terms of, social distancing and hygiene. So that when I could see this coming, really, it just gave me a bit of a head start. So we were able to introduce pretty early on things like hygiene measures, working from home. So we hadn't actually been affected by anyone at that point with having the virus. In the US, we've got about half of our dealerships closed compared to all of them in Europe and the UK, mainly on the east and the west coasts. But I think the other aspect that's been really interesting to talk to Roger about is the motor racing side, because he now owns the IndyCar Championship. He bought that beginning of the year, and that includes the Indianapolis Speedway, which holds in May every year the Indy 500, which is probably one of the biggest races in the world. It's got 300,000 people attending, so all that's had to be arranged, and it's been pushed out now, I think, until August. The season hasn't started yet, just like F1. So huge companies had so many different things to have to think about. It's been incredible, really. But yeah, you take it one day at a time and try and learn and adapt as best as you can. But it's been fascinating.
So in terms of the new car market, we've touched on it before about obviously the lockdown, and obviously the March results have come out and 44.4% down, and obviously at the same time as SMMT published the March results, they also published their reforecast of a 23% drop in the full year forecast down to 1.7 million, and obviously it's challenging for them to forecast out because they actually don't know when we're going to come out of this restriction, etc. But how big a challenge has this been? Because I mean, out of all the months, there's two ways of looking at it. Possibly is that that if it had been if we'd had this lockdown in February, you'd have risked losing all of March. We managed to get some of March, but obviously only half of it, essentially. So what's how big a challenge will it be to when we start to return to the market? Because obviously there's going to be an element of customers waiting for the cars that they couldn't get and hand over, etc. What's your thoughts around that?
Well, I think it's going to be whatever day we get told we can open. The next couple of weeks are going to be extremely busy. I mean, from a Sytner Group point of view, we've got several thousand cars which were destined to go out in that last week of March, which couldn't go out. I expect that's probably the same for a lot of groups. Clearly, that 44% kind of lends itself to that argument, doesn't it? Because if you think about the March market, normally it's very much weighted towards the last few weeks as the manufacturers push the last few cars through, and then we're all trying to get them to customers. So the fact that the kind of the shutters came down, a week or so to go, means that there's going to be a huge amount of build up of cars having to go out the door. So I think that's that's going to be inevitable. I mean, up until that point, I have to say that March was looking very strong. It was a really solid month. For us, we were ahead of prior year. But I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, at the moment, you could push if you wanted to, I suppose, for home deliveries. But as a business, we're not doing it at the moment. We're adhering to the kind of stay home, protect the NHS, save lives messaging. Even though we are getting lots of customers asking us to deliver cars, we're just kind of being patient. But I think most of our team now are furloughed anyway. I think we've got about 92-93% at home. But as soon as we get the all clear to start retailing again, we're going to be very busy. And then we don't know what yet the kind of level of demand is going to look like, particularly for new cars. So it's going to be interesting to see what that develops like over the next few months. We just don't know what consumer confidence is going to like and how much disposable income they have. So I think for the other parts of the business, after sales and used cars, there isn't really a reason why they both shouldn't hold up fairly well. One is largely based on need, and the other one can be stimulated, whether by choice or by pricing. So I think as a group, we're going to be working hard to try and make sure we're best placed to capitalise on that once the time is right. But at the moment, it's just about being patient and waiting to the point that we can go for it again.
So finally, Darren, what do you think will be some of the long-term impacts on the car retailing sector once we emerge from the lockdown?
Well, I think there's quite a few people commenting on this at the moment. I think it's probably too early to say for definite, but you could certainly understand if customers want less contact and more of a transaction carried out online for both sales and after sales. I think so. Online checking for service and online sales for cars. You can see that certainly coming to the fore. Having a more digitally focused home-based sales team. And contact centres working from home, that's something that we've managed to incorporate. That could be a new feature of business going forward. And I think also the in-dealership process is going to change. Hygiene methods and social distancing, they're all going to have to be put in place to try and reduce the number of physical touch points. So I think there's a fair few things that are going to change. And I think the other thing that we were speaking before we started to record this was that we don't know yet what the attitudes are going to be towards home working and also commuting. But if remote working does take hold permanently, then this could actually reduce the need for transportation generally. Be it cars, planes, buses, or trains. If people do decide actually that commuting is something that they'd rather not have to do anymore. So it's going to be fascinating to see. I think China is it will be a good barometer. They're a few months ahead of us. They're coming out of lockdown now, aren't they? So it'll be interesting to see the trends that develop there and see if they're going to resonate with our market. But I think after the last big crash we saw in 2008-9, the sector saw then many years of steady growth, really up until the diesel crisis. But the way we sold cars now hasn't really changed. Whereas I think this time there will be some level of change. It's kind of inevitable because of the way that we've all had to adapt. So I think any business that can manage to adapt to the new way of thinking will thrive and continue to be successful. But we'll just have to make sure we can do that, and then whatever the challenges are, meet them and address them, and then tackle them and respond and become a better and even more agile business as we go forward. I think that's all we can really plan to do at the moment, is just keep on watching and be the best we can be once the time is right.
No, and you're right. I think it's good. There's going to be a new norm, isn't there? behaviours are going to change somewhere, not just the automotive sector, but generally that sort of consumer behaviours will change, and business behaviours will change as well, won't they? So I think you're right. I think this is going to have a profound impact, like nothing like what 2008 had. This is going to change the way people interact and operate their businesses and buy essentially long term into it. So it's definitely going to be a different one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 2008 people just sort of dusted themselves off once they got going again, and off we went. Whereas this, it's inevitable. There's going to be change. What level we don't know, but certainly home working, online, distancing, hygiene, all these things, and particularly until we get a vaccine as well. I think that's going to be the key, isn't it? Until we get a vaccine in place, a lot of the practices that we see now are going to continue for some time, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, it's been a pleasure. I mean, it's been a long time getting you on, and I think we're glad that you're back on your feet, and at least you're resting, and it keeps you away from being busy out on the road and on your bike again. But at least you can rest and put your feet up, and during this period after your recovery.
Feet up. I don't know about resting, but
it's quite draining being on conference calls and webinars and the computer all day, isn't it? Actually, people are starting to think it's quite draining. They're longing for an hour's commute in a car or a train, aren't they, at the minute, I think?
Yeah, I mean, when I could drive again for about a week, I went to visit 2 dealerships and I loved it, and then suddenly I'm back home again. So it's been I've gone a bit stir crazy, but at least the weather's getting better now. So that's something to look forward to. But no, it's been a pleasure, and it was far too long being too busy to come on, but it was a pleasure talking to you guys, and I hope you found it interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for joining us, Darren.
Definitely. So, I mean, it leaves me to say, well, thanks for coming on, and thanks for sharing the insight with our listeners. And we obviously wish you and the team of Sytner all the best in these obviously different and challenging times, and as the word is, unprecedented times that we find ourselves in. But you've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio special podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. So please like and share through the social media channels, as it's important to, as Darren has said, that collaboration and sharing insight and knowledge is important more than ever these days, particularly across the dealer sector, and obviously come together with experience. So that's all from Curtis and I today. We'll be back with the industry headlines on Saturday as normal, but obviously watch out for the special podcast and interviews with industry leaders and specialists across the sector as we work through this crisis. So thanks for listening, and please stay safe, everybody.